Welcome to yet another in the series of Perth US Asia Center of Foreign Policy conversations. Unfortunately, many of the conversations that we have are with people who look and sound a lot like me. One of the things that we at the Perth US Asia Center recognize, however, is that it's really important for us to understand the rising generation, to understand the increasing diversity of Australia, of Perth in particular, but also the broader Indo-Pacific community. Over the last several years, we've been very fortunate to have our Indo-Pacific fellows located throughout the region, but also here in Western Australia. We have a remarkable community of rising leaders in the field. And today we thought we would sit down and have a conversation with two of them who have really distinguished themselves. Both currently are students here in Australia, but both are leading. So we're joined today first by Rosanna Radici, who is the WA president for UN Youth Australia and is currently studying for a Bachelor of Philosophy here at the University of Western Australia with honors. She's, I'm going to get to this in a minute, also a new Colombo Plan Fellow. And also we've got Wai Sin Wan, who is the founder of Perth Asian Professionals. I had a chance just less than a month ago to see Wai Sin in action as he hosted a remarkable evening event for Perth Asian Professionals, a panel discussion looking at breaking through the bamboo ceiling. And hearty congratulations to you for that, Wai Sin. But also, he's a student here at UWA. I'm sorry, at Murdoch University. I apologize. Forgive me, Murdoch University. Murdoch was a sponsor that evening as well. Bachelor of Engineering for honors at Murdoch University. And like Rosanna, a new Colombo Plan Fellow. So Rosanna, Wai Sin, thank you for taking the time to join us today. Really appreciate it.
Thanks, Gordon.
Thank you for having us.
Oh, that's good. Well, Rosanna, I'm going to start with you first. Both you and Wai Sin are new Colombo Plan Fellows. Now, most of our viewers will be familiar with the new Colombo Plan. Some, I think maybe the older generation, will be familiar with the original Colombo Plan. Starting in 1951, some 27 of the Commonwealth countries pioneered a program that was designed to help scientific, educational, economic development throughout the Asia Pacific by education. And by 1980, I think some 20,000 students had studied in Australia as part of the new Colombo Plan and have now then gone back to be leaders in their field all throughout this region. In 2014, the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade, then under our friend and colleague, former Foreign Minister Julie Bishop, launched what was called the new Colombo Plan, which was intended to kind of turn it on its head and help Australia better understand and have deeper relationships with and expertise in our neighbors in the Indo-Pacific by supporting the study and internships of Australian students in the Indo-Pacific. And so we're delighted. We've got Rosanna and Wai Sin to kind of help us understand the program. So I'm going to start with you, Rosanna. You've been selected as a new Colombo Plan Scholar for 2021. It's a unique time, obviously, with COVID. Could you tell us about your chosen study program, what it entails, and then also let us know how things are going in this COVID era when we're still a bubble within a bubble, if you will. So over to you, Rosanna.
Thanks, Gordon. So my proposed new Colombo Plan program is undertaking study in Japan. So I've studied Japanese for 7 years now. So Japan has always been really one of my areas of interest, especially in the Australia-Japan relationship. So my proposed study program is undertaking a semester of study at Colombo University, looking at political systems and international law structures and how they operate in Japan. I'm also going to be undertaking an internship and some language training whilst I'm away. Ultimately, COVID has made that a little bit difficult in seeking those opportunities and obtaining confirmation as to what we are actually able to undertake when we do attend. I think for me, the biggest impact of COVID is obviously the timing of the exchange. I was supposed to be in Japan about now, sadly, which is a little bit disappointing. But we are awaiting advice from the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade as to when we can leave the country and undertake our program. So for me, that's probably looking like undertaking my honors research in Japan, which would be very exciting. And I'm really passionate about exploring Japan's use of cultural diplomacy and how Australia and Japan can better facilitate a relationship that incorporates those elements of culture.
I trust that you're currently watching the Paralympics in Tokyo, and you were probably glued to the TV during the actual Olympics, just wishing that you were there in person.
Oh, definitely. I was selected in 2019 to actually go and volunteer at the Tokyo Olympics. But unfortunately, due to the COVID restrictions and the postponement of the games, I wasn't able to do that. So definitely glued to my seat.
Fully understand. And you were supposed to be, or are still rather planning to be in Tokyo, or what part of Japan were you planning to go to?
So I'm planning to go to Kobe University,
Yeah.
which is in Kobe. I have a very close relationship with Kobe. In high school, I hosted an exchange student who studied at Kobe College, which is a school located in Kobe. And I still keep in regular contact with her, which is really nice, and really looking forward to catching up when I'm over there.
Well, fantastic. Wai Sin, you've obviously had a somewhat similar experience, but obviously different focus. Tell us about your new Colombo Plan program plans and status.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Gordon, and thank you to the Perth US Asia Centre for hosting Rosanna and myself to be able to share about our interesting journey so far as new Colombo Plan scholars. So I'm not too far off from where Rosanna was meant to be based. I was selected to be a scholar in the South Korea region, where my program, proposed program, was meant to undertake sustainability research at the world-class research center at the Yonsei University. And as well, I was very interested to do industry placements, specifically with Dyson green energy hydrogen fuel cell plant, which is now in full operation and is the largest industrial hydrogen fuel cell complex in the world. And as well as was really interested to take placement with the Say Mangum Investment and Trade Development Commission. And for those who know about Mangum, it is a area where the national South Korean government has placed an important emphasis as a important Asian economic hub and development project, and is planned to be a city industrial complex that is underpinned and powered completely by renewable energy. So a large scale rollout of floating solar panels, offshore wind turbines, and the use of hydrogen. And this is strongly related to the course of study that I'm undertaking right now at Murdoch University, a fine institution like UWI, in renewable energy. And so, yeah, that has definitely disrupted my plans because I was very interested to see the rapid transitions that many of the Asian economies that Australia trades with, particularly with South Korea, are now undergoing accelerated progress towards a decarbonized economy. But nevertheless, I think we're very fortunate here in Western Australia. Not only are we able to live quite almost a normal life, but Western Australia is also the epicenter for hydrogen development. So to some extent, I'm still quite engaged with my program, but just on the other side or the piece of the puzzle. But I think it'll be very important for us to build on to the Indo-Pacific's region vision for hydrogen. And that's what was recently outlined with a report from the Perth US Asia Centre, as I understand. And I had a brief read through, and yeah, it's something that I would love to have gone to the other side of the region to be part of those, laying on those foundations for building up, you know, the cross-border supply chains, the partnerships, the consortiums that are engaged with building hydrogen infrastructure. So, but nevertheless, very fortunate to still be here in Western Australia to be part of the developments in the domestic hydrogen strategy.
Well, very good. Thank you. Thank you, Wai, and thank you, Rosanna. Those are both fascinating. Wai, you'll be pleased to know, and you may have already seen that last week, the Perth US Asia Center launched a report on hydrogen. And so we, for one, are keen to hear your reflections after you finish your new Colombo Plan Fellowship, given your focus on hydrogen there. And you won't be surprised that the two countries that are really the focus of our efforts are, in your case, Rosanna, Japan, and in your case, Wai Sin, Korea. So thank you very much. Just a broader question for both of you, and we'll start with you, Wai Sin. What do you expect to get out of it? What is it that, you're still in university, you're at Murdoch University, I've got that clear right now, and obviously things are quite volatile at the moment, but why were you interested in New Colombo Plan Fellowship or experience, and how do you hope to use it? What do you hope to get out of it?
No, thank you for a great question, Gordon. And I guess I want to start by expressing the context to my inspiration and ambition to be part of such a amazing program that is known as the New Colombo Plan. And as you touched in the beginning, there was an original Colombo Plan, which one of my uncles from Singapore participated in the early 1970s, where he came on to Australia as a university student to study law in Sydney. And to be able to hear about his lived experiences and his journeys and the cross-cultural ties and experiences that he went through, especially during the Whitlam era, which was a lot of progressive policies were being in place. I mean, there was a dismantling of the rigid immigration policy that was previously in place in Australia, known as the White Australia policy. And so my uncle had very positive experiences and had a really optimistic view about the Indo-Pacific region, and to grow up with his lived experiences has very much shaped my perspective about being involved in an active contributor in my small part as an individual to the stability and the connectivity of the Indo-Pacific. And so through a lot of karmic consequences from my, I guess, early exposure to the vast connectivity between Australia and Asia, mostly through my family ties, I've been set on the path to build partnerships between Australia and Asia, and that's what I've chosen as my vocation. So I'm a little older than most of the New Colombo Plan scholars, as I'm a returning student to university, but previously I was poached in my early university days to join a startup advisory firm that specialized in Asian engagement marketing and entrance to the Asian markets. So we were one of the few companies to first market and bring Western Australian honey into the Asian markets. And also we were engaged in a range of industries, particularly in property development, agriculture, minerals and resources, of course, but also in energy. And it's through my journey through being contracted by a government-backed investment fund from Singapore that were looking to invest in clean energy assets in Australia. But my background was mostly in agriculture, but I was chosen to look over the project because I was the most Australian of the whole team. So, but I had no idea anything. I had no clue about what renewable energy was, how it worked, what technologies was involved, what was the players involved. So I did a lot of desktop research and had meetings with many directors of different companies that were involved in the field. And through those lived experiences, I saw the massive opportunity that renewable energy was going to bring, and the rapid transformation that was already happening in Asia during that time. So I decided to put a handbrake on my budding career in Asian marketing, trade and investment to become a university student once more. and to take time to actually educate myself about renewable energy and its developments and the technologies involved. And I knew returning to university, I wanted to be part of programs that were still strongly linked to building relationships with the Indo-Pacific, and programs that had activities and I guess a wide plethora of materials to be engaged with the conversation of Australia's relationship with our region. And so I also was very fortunate and privileged to have some colleagues who were part of the first original cohort of the new Colombo Plan, and to be able to listen to their lived experiences and the amazing experiences they got out of the program. I was truly inspired and really motivated that I myself wanted to aspire to be part of such an amazing program like the new Colombo Plan. So for all these combination of all these karmic experiences from childhood to professional work, and with my meeting of some very amazing individuals, I knew that I wanted to participate and put my hand up to be part of the new Colombo Plan. So I worked very hard to achieve good grades and be very active in contributing to the wider community. And also just to want to share honestly my experiences and my vision for the Indo-Pacific through the frames of a rapid decarbonizing region, and as well as the challenges that we face, as you have touched on, and as Rosanna has briefly spoke about the geopolitical instability that we're facing, and on top of that, climate change, which we are facing as a globe. And now to compound that, to not make things easier, we're also facing a pandemic. So I personally see that as new Colombo Plan scholars, I hope to speak on behalf of the cohorts, but I'm speaking, if I could speak more selfishly for myself, I think we have a lot of responsibility, and there's a great weight of tasks and challenges ahead for the future Australian ambassadors to the region, especially with those three key challenges that we're facing. I think we'll be facing a very interesting region in a very dynamic environment. And so I think the new Colombo Plan has a big role to play in shaping ambassadors and bringing ambassadors to the region to be part of the region's transformation as we head towards decarbonizing, as we head to address the geopolitical instability caused by the dragging in the room, and as well as the post-pandemic, the rebuilding of societies, infrastructure. So a lot to play. I don't want to put too much expectations on my cohort.
I think
for myself.
You've basically given a good audition to be a spokesperson for the new Colombo Plan for the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade. They might be calling you up after watching the show. Very well articulated. Now, Rosanna, let's turn back to you. Obviously, every new Colombo Plan scholar is got different motivations, different backgrounds, different interests, and that's one of the strengths of the program, that you can do arts and culture, you can do society and culture. Would you give us a little bit more about your own background, your interest in Japan in particular, and what you hope to accomplish out of the new Colombo Plan participation?
Sure. So my fascination with the Indo-Pacific really began as a high school economics student. As a student of economics, there is no way you can escape the beast that is the Indo-Pacific region, especially with regards to sort of how Australia as an economy has developed. So that was really sort of my entry point into wanting to learn more about the Indo-Pacific. And it was with my work, so I'm very associated with UN Youth, which is a youth not-for-profit organization that really works on educating young Australian students on international affairs and global politics, and really encouraging them to think creatively about how to fix a lot of international issues. So it wasn't until I started working for UN Youth that I really started to pick up on the fact that the dominant perception, especially amongst young Australians, of Australia's relationship with the Indo-Pacific purely exists on an economic basis rather than sort of one that is a diverse partnership as we see with other nations. And I think that that perception is quite damaging to sort of how the relationship between Australia and Indo-Pacific nations is perceived on a global scale. And it's even more worrying that that is happening on a level amongst our youth, because our youth are going to be the changers and drivers of change for the future. So as soon as I started to pick up on that perception, it really encouraged me to think about how we could diversify and really encourage students to think about how Australia can shape our relationship with these nations to exist on more than an economic basis. And I don't doubt that it does already exist on beyond an economic basis, but I really think that we need to encourage people to perceive that and conceptualize those relationships differently. So I've always been very passionate about the arts. As a high school student, I participated in some opera productions, I've done musicals, I've played instruments. So arts has always been a massive part of my journey, and it's really brought me to where I am today. I'm also extremely passionate about the arts as a form of cultural exchange and a form of cultural diplomacy between nations. I think it's a pathway that's been extremely underutilized and possesses massive opportunities for nations to diversify their partnerships. As you mentioned before, I've studied Japanese for many years. As part of my Japanese language studies, I've also grown up learning to love the Japanese culture. That includes traditional arts like ikebana, which is flower arranging, martial arts like kendo and karate. So I think that these pathways are exceptional for encouraging more students to take up cultures that aren't familiar, and really sort of broaden and deepen those relationships and ties to other nations. So that was sort of what brought me to the New Colombo Plan program, in that I'm hoping that my study in Japan will really encourage me to come back to Australia, take what I've learned and develop a program for high school students, university students, to really learn more about the other nations that we do engage with economically, but more importantly, we have these cultural ties to as well. So I think cultural exchange, and as I mentioned before, cultural diplomacy is one of our most valuable tools moving forward for enhancing Australia's image on the international stage. And it's something that I'm very passionate about.
Well, that much is obvious. And again, I really do appreciate the diversity in both of your answers and your planned experiences in the process, because that highlights, I think, the breadth of the New Colombo Plan. Rosanna, I've always been fond of saying that this comes as a surprise to too many people, but international relations is all about relationships. and relationships often tend to be built upon the societal and culture issues that you're talking about. So I really appreciate that. Look, let's stay with you, Rosanna, for a second. You referenced the work that you're doing as president for UN Youth Australia. Could you tell us a little bit more about UN Youth Australia and what you're doing?
Of course. So for 2021, I am the president of the Western Australian division of UN Youth. UN Youth is a national youth not-for-profit organisation. As I mentioned before, we work a lot with high school students and primary school students in really encouraging them to think outside the domestic sphere and look at international relations and international issues. So that means that we run a variety of events. We run Model UN competitions, which we are in the middle of at the moment, which is very exciting. We run policy pitching competitions. We run Young Leaders Summits. We are running a regional Young Leaders Summit in the next few weeks, which is going to have an appearance from the US Consul General, which is very exciting. So we are really working towards encouraging students to think outside of the box and solve solutions in a creative manner. Our work with UN Youth really does involve around empowering youth to undertake their own advocacy. And we think that the first step to becoming a future leader is really having like comprehensive knowledge of your environment and other environments, which is sort of where the international sphere comes into it. I think that before UN Youth, I had a very limited understanding of what it meant to be involved in international relations. So our programs have helped me as a facilitator really understand our region and the broader international sphere, like our relationships with major power players like the United States, but also understand how smaller states in the Indo-Pacific can have a massive impact on states like Australia. So a lot of our work revolves around researching and drafting content surrounding the South China Sea, which we're looking at the moment. We'll deliver summits relating to that content. And we try and keep our content as up to date as possible, which means that we are a very useful avenue for students to like sign up and learn more about these issues. because in a school-based context, it's very difficult to access the resources that you need to really understand the scope of the scenarios that are presented to you in, for instance, a format like the news or TV. So I'm very passionate about how we use our workshops to develop not only leadership skills, but create global citizens.
You know, if you step back and look big picture, countries like Australia and the two countries that you're focusing on as new Colombo Plan Fellows, Japan and Korea, have tended to focus strongly on the United Nations, as well as other forms of multilateralism. You know, what we in Australia like to call the rules-based order, which broadly people refer to as the post-World War II liberal international system. And one of the reasons is I think countries like Australia, Japan, and Korea tend to recognize that they don't fare well in a system where might makes right, where it's just power politics. And they tend to support and want a system of international laws, standards, norms, institutions, organizations. And so I think you're going to find, regardless of the issue, some full-throated both financial and participatory support for the UN in Japan, likewise in Korea. And certainly, given the fact that Australians are among the best in being full-throated in our support of multilateralism in all of its forms, the new Colombo Plan is a really appropriate vehicle for strengthening those ties in the region. So hats off to you both. Wai Sin, you, again, I mentioned at the outset your work with Perth Asian Professionals. Congratulations again on the wonderful evening event you organized a couple of weeks ago. Could you tell us a little bit more about why you decided to create the organization and what your plans are?
Okay, great. Thank you for another fantastic question, Gordon. Like Rosanna, myself, we are ambitious to be part of vehicles that can create transformations and change. So from my simple observation, when I moved back to Perth after my gigs in Asia, I noticed how there was a large diaspora of professionals with Asian heritage in St. George Terrace walking down, but I didn't notice that there was any organization or platform that kind of grouped together the whole entire Asian Australian diaspora in a professional setting. And coming back from my experience in Asia and how I wanted to continue to be part of vehicles and platforms that continue to contribute to the connectivity of Perth and WA as a whole to Asia, I was actively thinking about joining different organizations and also maybe develop some side projects on the side that can facilitate that. And I've seen a lot of amazing organizations out there that focus on the global context very well, such as the United Nations Youth Association of Western Australia and their parent organization, the United Nations Associations of Western Australia. I thought it was super fantastic. Nothing wrong with any of those amazing organizations. But I figured that there might be something we need to look more inwards compared to outwards if we wanted to facilitate greater connectivity. It might sound a little bit counterintuitive. It was quite counterintuitive for me as well. But I decided to start PAP, or Perth Asian Professionals, on the basis to focus on cultivating the existing Asian Australian diaspora here in Western Australia, and how can we tap into that community's potential in building and facilitating and reconsolidating our partnerships and relationships to the region. As we look over the demographic in this broad category of the Asian community residing here in Australia, and specifically here in Western Australia, we see a very diverse range of demographics from many different parts of the Indo-Pacific region. And many of those communities are from the regions where Western Australia in particular has very strong economic, cultural, and social economical ties to. So I decided that we might need a platform to help facilitate that aspect. So I decided to take the risk and put on a startup mindset to start an organization from scratch. And so now PAP as a platform focuses on providing professional education and networking opportunities for professionals of Asian heritage in Perth through primary events. And I'd like to extend my thanks again to yourself, Gordon, and the Perth US Asia Centre team for your participation in our recent event, the Breaking the Bamboo Ceiling event, where that theme of that event really resonates so strongly with our mission to encourage greater leadership for Asian Australians to take part in, to be part of those conversations at the tables, to how we can greater contribute to enabling stronger Asia capabilities in Australian organizations and institutions, because this community are a community of people who do have that existing Asia literacy. They have a command of their mother language that they come from in their country of origin. They have the cultural awareness, and they also have professional educational qualification as well. So they're a well-educated bunch of people. And so how do you tap into that talent? And with that event, Breaking the Bamboo Ceiling, we noticed that there was a massive lack of representation and underrepresentation of Asian Australians in leadership positions, where we strongly believe that the greater representation of Asian Australians, like I said, can enhance the Asia capabilities of our institutions. And so the platform itself now plays directly to the Western Australian Asian engagement strategy between 2019 and 2030, where one of the key themes from the policy paper outlines that the state needs to support Asia literacy, as is a major influence on the states and the overall nation's competitiveness in engaging on economic opportunities and establishing strong trade partnerships and relationships. So one of the actions steps that the policy laid out was that the state government is intending to develop Asia literacy and partner with initiatives that develop Western Australians' Asian professional and business networks. So we very much try to play in part and contribute to that strategy, because we strongly believe those key themes and actions that the strategy outlines. And so Perth Asian Professionals is all about, how do we unlock the potential and the potential in the talent of Asian Australians? How can they be encouraged to take up greater leadership, to project their visions, to utilize their skills, utilize their resources to help make our state and our nation more resilient in very testing times in the region, especially.
No, well, thank you. I like to say, I came away from your Breaking the Bamboo Ceiling event very inspired. And part of it was I was inspired by the power of solidarity. Just from the focus of our conversation right now, Japan and Korea, despite being next door neighbors, have some remarkable differences. And then if you start talking about the difference between Japan, Korea, and China, Northeast Asia and Southeast Asia, or within Southeast Asia, between Philippines and Vietnam, and then you add on India and Bangladesh and Burma, you begin to realize how diverse the region is. And so on one hand, there's such diversity, and yet by recognizing the potential that exists in working together through Perth Asian Professionals, or the potential in cooperating together through organizations like UN Youth Australia, I think we all begin to recognize, the potential that does exist in solidarity and working together. The Perth US Asia Center can always do much better, but in our short, nearly 8 years of existence, we've really made a priority to make sure that we're seeking diverse voices. We've probably done better on gender issues than most, and while we recognize we can still improve, that's an area we've focused. It's only in the recent several years we've recognized that despite the fact that our engagement in the region, meaning our Indo-Pacific fellows in everywhere from Vietnam to Indonesia to Malaysia to Singapore to Japan, Korea, Vietnam, we've got those voices there. We have not yet been nearly as effective at giving voice to the community that you're leading, Wai Sin, in terms of this Perth Asian Professionals here in WA and in Australia more broadly. So that's clearly a priority of ours. And to be able to have conversations like this with rising leaders in this field is fantastic. Look, we've already gone on for quite a bit of time, but I wanted to kind of wrap up with the same question to both of you. And that is organizations like the Perth US Asia Center, University of Western Australia, Murdoch University, the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade, everyone recognizes the importance of engaging a rising generation earlier, right? And both of you have already started to answer this question because the presumption is the priorities, the focus, the passion of the rising generation is going to be different, and there's going to be enough difference with those of us who are wrestling with reality on a daily basis might miss some of those things. And so I kind of wanted to ask you a big picture question, which is really, as you think about yourselves and your peers, the organizations you're working with, your work at the New Colombo Plan program, well, what do you think are the issues that are most pressing today for Western Australia, for Australia more broadly? And then since both of you are big picture thinkers, you're thinking about the region, the Indo-Pacific more broadly, for the Indo-Pacific. Now, global, we'll leave the globe to the rest of the world together too, but let's just talk about Perth, Australia, and the Indo-Pacific. What are the issues you think are most pressing? Where do you think that organizations like the Perth US Asia Center or Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade that supports the New Colombo program should be focusing more things? Rosanna, let's start with you. What is your passionate pressing issues where we are putting our resources?
I would say the issue that I find most pressing at the moment is sort of an issue that I've been informed of in my capacity as someone who's very passionate about economics and also political science and international relations. And that is sort of the growing use of what is referred to in foreign policy literature as coercive diplomacy, especially in the Indo-Pacific. So there was a report and a study published by the Australian Strategic Policy Institute that I read recently that stated that nations such as China are really, really increasing their use of coercive diplomacy tactics. This particular study found that China had exercised coercive diplomacy more than 150 times in the last year against foreign governments and foreign nations. So I think Australia finds itself at this crossroad, especially in this sort of tug of war between Australia, the United States, and China. We are a nation that has traditionally found themselves trying to be cooperative with as many nations as possible. As you mentioned before, Gordon, we are always a nation that has prided itself on its approach to engaging in multilateral institutions and multilateral relationships. So I think that is at the center and the core of Australia's relationships and their foreign policy. However, we do find ourselves in this crossroad of trying to maintain as many relationships as we can, whilst also maintaining this presence as a leader in rules-based order, which means that we are trying to take a stance against coercive diplomacy measures like economic measures that have been imposed against Australia in the past. I'm referring specifically to the punitive measures imposed on Australia on barley, liquid natural gas, coal, and timber that happened in early 2020. And I think Foreign Minister Marise Payne sums it up best when she released her statement saying that she did want constructive ties with these nations, but they can't come at the cost of our sovereignty or security. So I think that is one of the most pressing dilemmas that Australia finds itself in at the moment. And I think it's an area that definitely needs more attention as to how we can walk this tightrope of managing as many relationships as we can, whilst also maintaining those two principles.
Well, thank you. Beautifully articulated. For your own interest and for those who are watching this conversation, in the early part of this year, I think it was March, my colleague, Dr. Jeffrey Wilson, our Director of Research here at the Perth US Asia Center, authored a report called Adapting Australia to an Era of Geoeconomic Competition, or Geostrategic Competition, I think the term was. But it really identified specifically the fundamental challenges, which are really a contravention of the rules-based order. Ideally, the international relations and economic activity should be governed based on rules, not based on political preferences. But that's very helpful. So Wai Sin, we're going to turn to you. What again? I realize you've already given us a long list, but if you had to focus on one, what is the issue that you think is the most pressing issue facing us that we ought to be paying more attention to?
Thank you for the great question again, Gordon. Yeah, it's a very difficult question to answer in honesty, because I think there's many pressing issues right now facing the region, as well as in the global context, but focusing on the region. Like, I resonate deeply with what Rosanna pointed out earlier. Australia is at a crossroads. This is, in my own humble interpretation of the situation, this is one of those defining moments in history, if I could put it, with so many major factors that are really defining this region. And Australia sits as a crossroads where we have to think about, how do we want to place ourselves in the region going forward? How do we want to portray ourselves? And I think, even being a middle power, I think there's a lot of things that we could do in our own hands to really shape our future in the region. And I think just looking at how Japan has done it so far, their incredible ability to balance economic and political relationships with so many of the region's partners, I think is an example to look forward to. And we'll look forward to a discussion with Rosanna to find out from her insights about how Australia can learn from Japan's example in positioning ourselves in the region, because I think they've done a fantastic job, despite the historical grievances they have had with the regions. They've done such an amazing job to maintain those relationships, and I think Australia can learn a bit better of how to maintain economic and political relationships. I guess one particular area to focus on is definitely the economic side of things. I mean, with many of our major trading partners in the region accelerating towards decarbonisation, this puts some serious questions about our existing commodity exports to our major trading partners, particularly my focus with South Korea, who are one of our big four coal exports markets. We have serious questions to ask ourselves is, how do we diversify our trade relationships with all these different Asian economic partners, such as South Korea? And this is a defining moment in Australia, whether we decide to be innovative, take risks, and be ambitious to create whole new industries, particularly industries that are renewable energy based, hydrogen based. Not only exporting hydrogen, but like I touched on the point earlier, well, this is coming more from a proud West Aussie, that Western Australia, we are really particularly primed for an opportunity to take advantage of the transitioning towards a decarbonised environment in the region. We have the best resources for renewable energy. We've got the sun, we've got the wind, and we got the land to do a lot of things, and not just being able to export that clean energy. We also have potential to access clean and cheap energy ourselves. So what can we do with that existing resource in creating new industries, particularly in manufacturing, and a wide range of supply chains that goes with that. So I think we're needing a lot more visionaries, and there's a lot of visionaries that have stepped up to the challenge, as we've seen. So it's good to see, and it's great to see a lot of thought leaders publishing their perspectives and a plan to do that, such as one that recently came out from the Perth US Asia Centre. So I think it's the time to take action, in honesty. We have the brains, we have the talent, we have the resource, we're well positioned in the region. We just need to take a lot of actions to make that happen.
Fantastic. Look, earlier in the conversation, I think Wai Sin referred to the new Colombo Plan scholars as ambassadors. Based on this conversation alone, the two of you are wonderful ambassadors for your educational institution, Murdoch University and UWA, for the new Colombo Plan itself. and in that case for WA and for Australia. So we're delighted to have this conversation. We look forward to partnering with you as you continue your New Colombo Plan studies, and more importantly, to building upon what you learn. Our hopes are that the ongoing disruption of the COVID pandemic will enable you to be creative in your engagement, and we look forward to supporting you as you go forward, representing our community here. So on behalf of the Perth US Asia Center, thank you again for your time. I look forward to continued collaboration. Thanks.